Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Can you let me know in the chat if you can hear me? Okay, let me know in the chat if you can hear me. Okay, excellent. So hello, everybody, and welcome. I am Katja Kaine. I am the creator of The Novel Factory, and I am a YA author. And I am so pleased to be here as part of the AuthorTube conference. I think there's been a lot of really fantastic presentations already, and I am very pleased to be part of this and hopefully to give you a lot of value. My presentation is about my 15-step process of writing a novel. It's a very whistle-stop tour. It's a pre-recorded presentation. So in a minute, I am going to start that, but I will be here. I will be in the corner. So if you have questions and or just comments and things, then I'll be there to chat. And then at the end, I will be around for however long we have to answer any questions that you have. And we have some AuthorTube moderators and my colleague Mekin in the chat as well to also answer your questions. So there should be lots of us around to help. Okay, I'm not going to say too much more because I do quite a lot of introduction in the presentation. So let's get on to that. Or when I can find it. Okay, can you see that now? If you can let me know if you can see that okay, and then I will start it. Okay, great. Let's go. Hi, I'm Katja Kaine, creator of The Novel Factory. In this webinar, I am going to take you through my 15-step process for writing a novel. First, a little bit about me. My name is Katja Kaine, and I have been writing for over 15 years. Over that time, I have read an awful lot of books, and I have written a lot of terrible novels. And in recent years, I have started to get a bit of success, including winning some awards. And in 2024, I signed a 6-figure deal with Penguin Random House. My debut YA feminist fantasy novel is due to be released in 2026. As well as being a writer, I am the creator of The Novel Factory. The Novel Factory is software for novel writers, which I created initially for myself, just to help me with my own process. And I decided to share it with other people because I thought they might find it useful. Initially, there was just a small handful of us using it, but over the years, our community has grown, and now thousands of writers use the software and find it very helpful in being more efficient and productive. And the software also actually includes a roadmap which aligns pretty closely with the process that I'm going to take you through now, because that's the sorting out your premise, figuring out a plot outline, using templates and established structures, creating your characters, developing themes, blocking out your scenes, writing your scenes, editing the scenes, redrafting, feedback, and then once you get to the end of that, you have your completed manuscript. So if you're new to writing, then you complete your manuscript while learning the craft. If you're more experienced, then this can be a useful way to formalize your own process. I have spoken to quite a few pantsers who say that they would like a little bit more structure in their process, although not too much, because they don't want to change exactly how they do things. So this can be useful for that. Or if you already have an established planning process, you may still find certain steps in here useful to slot into your own way. And I always say that every process for every writer is unique, and you should trust your own instincts. And this is really just intended to be a starting point for people who aren't quite sure how to get started. And you should take it or leave it, mix bits up, and just change it however you need to suit you. So the first stage in my 15-step process is the premise. And the premise is the heart of your story. And when I write a premise, I like to use the 5 key story elements theory. So the 5 key story elements are character, situation, objective, opponent, and disaster. I won't go into detail about all of those now because I need to get through the whole 15 steps. If you would like to learn more about that, there's loads of resources on my website, on my YouTube channel, and of course in the software itself is where you can find the full explanation for each of these steps. So the first step that I do is the premise, and I look at those 5 elements, I pin those down, and I form them into a single sentence, which sounds quite a lot like a cinema trailer. When this situation happens, can character achieve objective before opponent does disaster? And if you put it together in that way, then you will see that you have a full premise which shows that you have enough to start your story, rather than just a concept or a spark of an idea which isn't going to be a good starting block for you. So first the premise. Next, I do a plot outline. There are lots of different plot outlines you can use. I am a particular fan of the hero's journey and Save the Cat, and also the character-driven hero's journey by Alan Palmer. I strongly recommend you check that out. And I have sort of munged all of these together into a universal plot outline which contains all of the key elements that I find the most important in my books. Again, use the plot structure that works for you. If you have a favoured one, read around them if you have time. If you don't, you can use the one that I've suggested as a starting point. So in my plot outline, I have the following points: the status quo, the complication, crossing the threshold, the new world, external obstacles, temptation or internal obstacles, dark moment, the final conflict, and the epilogue. I'll very briefly outline what each of these are. So the status quo is the situation before the main action of the story starts. What world is your character living in? Now, although this is often described as the ordinary world, this shouldn't be boring. And also something that you have to establish in almost all stories is that there is something missing from the character's life. There is something that they need. So that is what you need to establish in the status quo. The next stage is the inciting incident, often called the call to action or the catalyst. This is where something happens to knock your character's life off course. They cannot continue in their status quo. They cannot stay in their ordinary world. It is something unignorable that happens. It is usually an external force. I find it's quite useful to think of it as being either an invitation or a threat. So they cannot ignore this, so they must take action, and we call this crossing the threshold. This often involves traveling to a new place, often by train, but it doesn't need to be, it just means a change in situation. So it could be that now they are being hunted by the police, even though they're still living in their ordinary community. Now they find themselves in the new world. This is quite a large section. All of these stages are not equal in length. And this section is where you fulfill the promise of the story. So if it's a rom-com, then you will have lots of funny romantic moments. If it's a mystery, then the mystery is built up. And you will have lots of trials that the character will face, some that they will win, some that they will pass, some that they will fail. The rest of the characters will be introduced. Some of these characters will be friends, some of them will be foes. This leads you up to the temptation or internal obstacles. This is when the bad guys are closing in and the character feels like all is lost. They've hit rock bottom. They've lost all their friends. They're trapped. It feels like there is no way out. There is no way they could possibly win from this. If you have this low, then that makes the high all the more impactful, because after the dark moment, the character will find a way to carry on. They will find whatever the key is or the strength inside themselves that they need to go to the final battle. This is the climax where they face the biggest opponent they have, whether that's a big monster or, the lack of courage inside their heart, and possibly both. And then they have the final battle, and in most stories, they will triumph and be successful. And that's mostly the end of the story. But if you just stop the story there, then your readers will feel like they've been cut off a little bit abruptly. So it's a really good idea to have some kind of tying up of loose ends, a settling back down after the high excitement of the final battle. So that is the epilogue, where you just wind things down and establish what the new ordinary world is, where your character has changed and they have become better and more integrated with themselves. Okay, on to step 3. Once I've got my premise and plot outline, I turn straight to characters, because characters are arguably the most important part of your story. They are what will carry your readers through. Your characters should be people that your reader wants to spend time with. Doesn't mean they have to be nice, but there has to be something about them that makes readers want to hang out. And it depends on your reader to a certain extent. Some readers quite like hanging out with quite nasty characters, but in general, you will find that if there is no redeeming quality or vulnerability in your character, a lot of readers will be turned off. In any case, at this stage, I start thinking about my main characters. So there is my protagonist, my main character. That's arguably the most important one, but there will also be a handful of secondary characters. And at this stage, I am usually thinking about the protagonist, the antagonist, the mentor, and the ally or sidekick. At least those 4 characters are ones that I want to be thinking about because they're going to play such large roles in the story. For each of those characters, I will note down their name, age, gender, occupation, what type they are. Are they the protagonist or the mentor or the antagonist? I think about their physical appearance, and that could cover their face, also their build and their clothing, if they have any really distinguishing features. And for the non-protagonist characters, I will write a single summary sentence of their role in the story and a paragraph summary of what their role in the story is. For the main character, I will also be thinking about what they want, which is their external goal, and what they need, which is their internal goal. Figuring out the difference between internal and external goals and how they work together and in conflict and in contrast, I think is one of the most powerful ways to create a compelling, moving story. So I highly recommend you look into that. Again, on our website, we have an article dedicated to want versus need. So check that out, or I will also try to remember to put the link in the description below. Next, I do a short synopsis and then an extended synopsis. I will take my plot outline and also what I've learned about my characters, and I will write a single page summary of the entire plot. Now, most writers hate writing synopses, single page synopses anyway, and I am no exception, but I think it is so valuable for making sure that you know what the heart of your story is, because a novel is a really long piece of writing, and you can do lots of different things, you can go down lots of different tangents, but it needs to be coming back to a single core, a kind of backbone, if it's going to all hang together and feel satisfying in the end. Having this single page synopsis is really useful for that. And then I take the short synopsis and I extend it into an extended synopsis. And this is where I really kind of let my imagination flow. It can be as long as I like, 4 pages, 10 pages, 20 pages, really just whatever comes to mind as I'm thinking about the synopsis and adding in detail and anything that comes to mind, just to get more of an idea of how the story is developing. Because usually I'll have so many ideas at this point and I really want to just, get everything down there to see where it fits in the story. And doing it in this way also helps you start thinking about where you might want to be doing foreshadowing. If you think of something that's happening towards the end, then you can also note in your extended synopsis, a kind of bookend to go in somewhere earlier. Step 6 in my novel writing process is the goal to decision cycle. I find this a very useful technique for making sure my story is flowing, that it's rolling on, that each thing leads to the next thing in a way that feels natural to the reader, even if they're not aware at all of this technique being used. When I first started writing novels, I went through the entire novel and I applied the goal to decision cycle mechanically and deliberately to the entire extended synopsis. And if you're new to this, I do think that's a really good technique and a really good exercise. I've been doing it for so long now that I tend to do it instinctively, I do it intuitively. So these days I apply this only if I find an area in the book which just doesn't feel right and I don't know why, then I will apply it. So to briefly go through the goal to decision cycle, the parts of it are goal, conflict, disaster, reaction, dilemma, decision. So at the beginning of each scene, the character should have a goal, something that they want to achieve. That gives it momentum, that gives them agency. But of course, it's not so easy and they hit some conflict. Ideally, the conflict doesn't end well and it ends in some kind of disaster rather than success. And your character finds themselves in a worse situation than they were before they started the scene. Next, you have the second part of the scene, and that is where the character reacts. Because if you go straight from the disaster to the next goal, it feels very jarring, like they're still reeling from this disaster. And this fills in the other half of the circle to bring it back round. So, from the disaster, you go to reaction. What is the character's reaction to this situation and this disaster? How do they feel about it? Are they devastated? Are they disappointed? Do they feel crushed? If you can explain that to your readers or let them feel it with you, then they will feel like they are part of this journey and experiencing what the character is. So after they've had their reaction, they will be faced with a dilemma. What do they do next? Ideally, both options or all options, there could be more than 2, will be bad ones if you want it to be a compelling, exciting story. But they still have to pick one. They have to pick the least bad option. So they do that, and at that point they have made their decision, and the decision gives them a new goal, and the cycle starts again. Once I've applied my goal to decision cycle, I go back to doing more character work. In the initial character introductions, I just got a rough idea of what my characters were like. Now I want to do a really deep dive and really get to know them in a lot more detail. So for each of my major characters, I will start looking at their backstory, what happened to them in their past that made them who they are today. We are all built up of our experiences. So what was theirs like? Their childhood. This will also include looking at their family. What's their family situation? What was their family life like? Do they have lots of siblings? Are they an only child? Did their parents love them unconditionally, or were there conditions on that love which have affected how they respond and what their coping mechanisms are today? I like to explore all of those things and think about maybe a few specific scenes or a few specific experiences, which I may even write out as scenes, even if I don't use them in the book, which have particularly formed the issues that they have today, which again might come out in subplots if it's secondary characters, which they can resolve throughout the story. I like to look at their passions and hobbies because I think that when you see somebody lit up about something, about a topic that they are in love with, then we're just drawn to that and we feel lit up too. And it really doesn't matter what it is. Humans have an amazing array of interests that you cannot even believe, like anything from Formula One to chameleon mating dances to reading witch trial archive documents. Whatever it is, people who are passionate about things are people that we are drawn to. So if you can give your character a passion, it may come out very importantly in the novel, or it may not, or it may just be touched upon. But you will know that they deeply care about this thing, and those details will help the character feel real. Similarly, fears and phobias. We are all afraid of something, and exploring that can be a very rich theme for informing your novel and making it more interesting and making your characters feel real. If you know what they're afraid of, then that can be used in scenes to increase the stakes, increase the tension, increase the conflict. So it can be useful for that. Also, it helps you understand your character more if you know what happened maybe to cause this fear, if there was a sort of root of it. And that again helps you build up the layers of your character like a real person. I like to give my characters a treasured item. Again, sometimes this will come up in the novel. Sometimes it will be really important, because if that treasured item is stolen or broken and the reader understands how important that item is to the character, even if nobody else thinks it looks like anything of worth, then the reader will feel the pain of that character. And I always think we're in the business of making people feel things, so I'm a big fan of that. Also, the treasured item can represent a relationship from their past or an important memory. And again, this adds layers and details to the character. I sometimes find it useful to look at the daily life of the character. Think about what is their entire normal day like, usually before the action of this story starts, from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep again at night. What does it look like? What do they do one thing after another? Can you account for every minute of their day? That can be really enlightening in lifting your character and giving them the detail to make them real. Similarly, I will think about their home. What is their home like? Where do they live? Do they live in a mansion? Do they live in a little cell? Do they live in a bivouac in the countryside? Understanding what their home is like, and like as in what kind of type of home it is, but also what style is it, or how is it kept? Is it immaculately clean, or is it a complete mess? Is it filled with stuff, or is it completely minimalist? All of these things really tell you about your character. And also, when you are thinking of those things, you can go back to what you already know about your character and make sure it feels right for them. And if it does feel like it's contrasting, then think about why that is and make sure you can justify that. For example, if you know you have a character who is very orderly and organized in their thoughts, is their house also orderly and organized to reflect that, or is it chaotic? And if it is chaotic, is that because that part of them really needs to come out? This can just be so interesting to explore. Again, I've touched on this before, but family, I like to think about what their family is like, not just in their childhood, but also now. Do they have lots of siblings? How will that have affected them? Are they an only child? Have their parents always loved them unconditionally? Are they still around now? All of these things affect who we are and how we respond to the world around us. And finally, I like to consider at least one quirk or unique attribute for each character. This may have already come out from the things that we've already listed before. It may be their fear or phobia. It may be something about their appearance. It may be to do with their passion or their treasured item. Or it may be something completely different. But having a unique attribute can be really useful for referring to when the character comes back into a scene, to remind people who they are, and it can just help them stand out from the other characters and create a clearer image in your reader's mind, even if it's not a visual attribute. Okay, step 8 is scene blocking. This is where I take my extended synopsis and I break it up into individual scenes, and where it's just a sort of sentence or two, I expand that to describe basically what I expect to happen in that scene. This will be closely linked or informed by the goal to decision cycle. And you can align your scenes exactly with the goal to decision cycle so that you start each scene with a new goal, but it doesn't have to be that rigid. You can have the goal to decision cycle slightly out of sync with your scenes if that works better. But yes, I will summarize each of my proposed scenes, and I like to use digital index cards for this. Sometimes I use hard copy in real life index cards as well. But in the Novel Factory, I have a digital corkboard which I have created so that I can write on the index cards, and then you can shuffle them around, drag and drop, put them into chapters and things like that. And I like to do that so that I have a god's eye view or a bird's eye view of my entire story. And I know what's going to happen in each scene. And I personally prefer to do it digitally because I'm always editing things, and I kept having to screw up index cards and throw them away and write a new one, or they would be covered in Tipp-Ex and crossed out bits. So I just find doing it digitally just allows for my constantly iterative process to not create a lot of waste and scribbles. So I will create an outline of each scene. And now, step 9, I am ready to do my first draft. So if you've done all the previous stages, then you should be in pretty good shape to write a first draft that will be solid, and you won't find yourself getting stuck, staring at a blank page, not knowing what's happening next, because you've already got that all planned out. You know what's going to happen next, all the way to the end, which is one of the advantages of having a plan, if that works for you. So I have a few rules for writing my first draft. I always attempt to write my first draft within 1 month. I try to write at least 50,000 words for my first draft. That will really vary depending on the type of book you're writing. So a children's book will not need 50,000 words in its first draft because it will only have about 45,000 words in its final draft. And if you're writing a fantasy novel, then the final number might be more like 120,000 words, in which case your first draft might be longer. But I find 50,000 words is achievable in a month. If you can write 2,000 words a day, then you can even have a few days off. And trying to do it all in 1 month gives me the energy and momentum, and I can maintain that kind of energy for about a month in a way that I just can't maintain that for 6 months or even a year. That may not work for you. If it doesn't, then set a smaller word count target, or I have even heard of people writing their first draft in a week. If you can do that, fabulous. But the main advice I have for a first draft is do not edit, do not look back, do not reread it even, except like just the last chapter or so you can get back into the story. And above all, do not keep rewriting the first 3 chapters. Just don't do it. You can't know what your opening is going to look like fully until you have written your final chapters. And I have wasted so much time rewriting the first 3 chapters of my novel, only to throw them away wholesale after I've got to the end. And I think that completing your first draft is such a huge achievement that getting that under your belt and getting it done is really worth doing, rather than just kind of, treading water, rewriting the first 3 chapters. Again, like I always say, this is just my opinion. If you find something works for you, something else works for you, and if you find this advice unhelpful, don't follow it. Trust your instincts. Do what works for you. This is what works for me. Okay, so I've got my first draft under my belt, which is great. Woo! Now I need to set that aside for a little while and do a bit more work. I will have learned so much during that first draft about what the story is, how it's going to be told, and what my characters are going to do in it. And in many cases during the first draft, they might have gone away from what my initial plan was because that just didn't feel right when I was in the moment and in the flow. And that, for me, is totally fine. Now it's about reworking, tightening up, making sure everything comes back to this core, this heart of the story, and adding layers and detail, all of which complement that. So the next thing I will work on is locations. I will have a look at what locations have appeared in my novel, and I'll dive into each of them more deeply. I will look at pictures online. I will look at videos online. Sometimes I will have been lucky enough to have visited that place in person, so I will draw on my own memories of my experiences, of things that stood out to me in that place and how it felt. Another thing that I find extremely useful to do with regards to locations is to think about the 5 senses. So for each location, I will go through each of the senses. So sight, what can you see? Sounds, what can you hear? Tastes, are there any tastes on your tongue? Or if there is food around, what would that taste like? Touch, is there anything you can feel, like on your skin? Or if you were to touch things with your hands, what would that feel like? And smells, what can you smell? So I write down a list of all of these things for each of these locations, and then that's a kind of palette that I can draw on when I'm actually back editing and rewriting the scene. In step 11, I turn my attention to subplots. I will look at each of my subplots in isolation, and I will see whether they have a setup, development, and payoff. And subplots can be many different things, from romances to secondary character arcs, to mysteries or little even misdirection mysteries, things like that. So I will look at each of those and really work on each of them in isolation, and then go back and see how they look in the whole story. In stage 12, I look at character viewpoints. This again is more character work, because if your characters feel real, then your reader feels like they've experienced something true, and it touches them more deeply. And one technique that I have always used for doing this is to look at the entire novel from the point of view of each of my major characters. So I will look through the whole, not necessarily like the entire manuscript, but maybe look at each of the scene summaries and think about what each character was doing in that scene, whether they were in it or not. And if they were in it as well, you think about what were they thinking when the hero's running around doing this, that, and the other. Did they think that was a good idea? Did they think it was a bad idea? Were they afraid? Were they irritated? I also like to think about what was each character doing, not each character, just each main character, before the scene started. I find this is a particularly rich way to make them feel real, because if the character just appears, then they're quite often sort of not really doing anything. Whereas if you think, what was the character doing before? Were they doing their sketching, or had they just had an argument with someone? And then that can inform how they behave in the scene itself. And again, it makes them feel like they have their own inner lives and they haven't just popped up in order to serve your story. So I go through each scene from the point of view of the major character, and that makes it feel like they have their own lives. Okay, this is quite a long stage, redrafting and editing, or it is for me anyway, and I go through several different stages of editing: structural editing, scene editing, and line editing. So structural edits are things to do with the plots, the subplots, character arcs, making sure that those are all solid, consistent, that all the information is given out in a way that makes sense, and there is enough information for the reader to understand what's going on, but not so much that they feel like they're being repeated to. Then you have the scene edit, which is looking at each scene in isolation, thinking about whether it flows, thinking about whether there's enough conflict, whether there's enough interest, whether it's doing enough. Making sure there's something happening. So I might have initially written a scene where the characters are just having a conversation. During the re-edit, I might think, well, what are they doing? Are they playing chess? Are they walking through the forest? Are they cooking? This gives you some actions that they can do, which makes the story feel a lot more alive than if they're just sitting on the couch talking, not moving. And line edits. So this is checking your grammar, punctuation, but also checking the sentences flowed. The order of things in a sentence. Make sure someone isn't getting up from their seat as they walk out of the door. Make sure they get up from their seat and then walk out of the door. These kind of details will make your readers feel more immersed, and it will feel jarring to them if those sort of things are out of order or inconsistent. So those are the kinds of things that I would be checking on line editing. Okay, we are nearly at the end. Step 14 is feedback. When I first started writing, I wrote completely in isolation for quite a few years. And when I found the courage to show my work to other people was when I really started improving. I think that getting feedback from the right people is invaluable. And they do have to be the right people, because there is such a thing as bad feedback and bad critique. So take care to make sure that you are getting your feedback from people who know what they're talking about to some degree. That doesn't mean they have to be experts. That doesn't mean that you have to pay for expensive editors if you don't have the cash for that. You can get feedback from groups where you exchange feedback with each other, and that can be extremely valuable. I just mean that they ought to be writers, ideally, and not your mum or your cousin, unless your mum or your cousin are writers. You can find in-person feedback groups. That's how I started, and a lot of the people from those groups are still some of my best friends. But if that isn't available to you, if where you live just doesn't have in-person writing groups, then there are definitely lots of great options online. There are general feedback groups or critique groups online that you can join, and there are specific groups for particular genres, for example, romance or crime or children's, where you can make connections with people and then exchange manuscripts with them as well. But I do highly recommend getting feedback on your work, even though it's terrifying. And step 15, final polishing. This is really just an extension of the redrafting. It's just keep redrafting, keep editing until I'm happy with it. One of the ways I do this is to print out the entire manuscript onto paper, because it really is astonishing how much more you see when it's written on paper. So I will print it out and I will go through it with a red pen or a green pen and just make notes, but I will not change anything while it's printed out. Once I've got to the end, then I will go back to my Novel Factory project and I will start editing it digitally in there. And sometimes I will go through 4, 5, 6 redrafts in this way, finding different things that I want to strengthen, looking at different subplots, looking at how the characters are developing and whether they're unique or not. So I will just keep doing that until I feel that I have done everything I can to make it the best book that I possibly can. So I really hope you've enjoyed this whistle-stop tour through my 15-step writing process. I love hearing from people and finding out what their processes are like, whether they use any of the same stages as me, if they have other new techniques and stages that I should know about in case it can help me make my process even better. So I'd love to hear from you if you would like to get in touch with me. Now we are going to go to a Q&A. So I am excited to hear all of your questions.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Sorry about the sound glitches. This is our first, or my first, live YouTube session. So it was sort of inevitable that there would be some technical problems. And as I said to Mekin beforehand, if there are going to be any problems, they will happen live. So there we are. But such is life. Hopefully you managed to hear it okay and it wasn't too distracting. So I can see that there's one question which has come in already, which I will answer. But in the meantime, if you have other questions, please do put them in the chat so that I can answer them. Okay. So the question is, do you also plan character descriptions? If you missed it, if you came in a bit later. Yes, so I do planning of characters. I do initial basic planning where I just look at their name, the role that they're going to play, basic description. I will look at nicknames for them because I find that useful. So I do some basic planning, and then I do a bit more work on the story, and I see how they kind of interact with the story, because I find that the characters don't exist in isolation. They exist as part of the story itself. So they will be affected by the events. They'll be affected by the other characters. And so I'll learn a lot once I've done my short synopsis and my extended synopsis. And then I will do more planning, more sort of a deep dive into the characters, where I will look at their family, their backstory, their passions and hobbies and things like that. And I'll do a lot more work on that. And I often find when I'm writing the actual drafts or the scene blocking, I will discover things about the characters at that point. So if I might want the character to be doing something, and I'll realize that they are cooking, and it turns out they love cooking, and I didn't know that until I saw them doing that in the scene. So it is a very iterative and kind of feedbacky kind of process. Okay, do you have different drafts for different editing stages, like one for structural edits, one for subplots, things like that? Yes, I absolutely do that. I am on draft 7 of my current novel, and I think the previous novel I got up to about draft 11 or 12. It's not set in stone, it's not specific, but I will usually I'll have a draft which is the first draft is very loose, very rough. It normally starts off quite detailed and prosy, and then just like degrades as time goes on, as I'm just trying to get the story out. And then, yes, I will have a structural edit stage where I will try to still not deal with the details and the prose, but I will be looking at the main plot outline, the main character arcs. I will look at each of those in isolation, write synopses, munge them together, and then go through the entire novel again to make sure all of that fits. And then, yes, and then after that, I will have a draft where I will be looking at each scene much more closely, and I'll be thinking about the details of the scene. I'll be thinking about the setting in a lot of detail, what furniture is there in the room, if it's inside, what's on the shelves, the items on the shelves, how do they represent what's happening in that scene or the character or the world, all of that detail. And then in later drafts, I will be looking at each sentence. Does that follow on perfectly? Is there anything that throws me out of it? And like really on a like word by word basis. Okay. Are there any more questions? Otherwise, we can. Thank you very much for my book deal. Yes, it was absolutely a dream come true, and something I've been working towards for a very long time. But yes, if there are no questions, then the AuthorTube moderators can let me know if there's anything else I need to share, if we need to direct anybody somewhere else. And yes. And also there are a load of links that have been put in the chat. So do check out all of those links. I believe there are a load of giveaways and competitions where you can win lots of fabulous stuff. So make sure you check out all of that. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. I do hope you've enjoyed it. As I said, I do really love it when people get in touch with me to give me feedback. If there's anything you found particularly useful, if you have any questions that you haven't thought of now, but you would like to ask me later, just get in touch. Other than that, then please enjoy the rest of the conference.